On a December afternoon, as the pale winter sunlight illuminated the streets of Boston, Melanie Williams stood by the large window in the living room, gazing at the snow-covered common. The red brick walls of the Sheraton Hotel were bathed in the twilight glow, creating a sense of tranquility in the midst of the city. Melanie's slender fingers gripped her mug, its warmth slightly thawing her chilled heart. Lost in thought again? Her husband's voice from behind startled her. Greg was wearing a navy sweater and had a gentle smile on his face. His brown eyes always had a calm light in them, which was one of the things that had attracted Melanie 5 years ago. Just a little, Melanie smiled back. I was thinking about how to decorate for Christmas. That was a lie. In reality, her mind was preoccupied with the Christmas dinner that was just 2 days away. The annual event at Greg's mother Evelyn's home. From her 4 previous experiences, Melanie could well anticipate what awaited her there. Greg wrapped his arms around his wife from behind and embraced her. You're worried about my mother, aren't you? Not at all, Melanie answered, but her tone betrayed her words. Mel, I know how cold Mother can be toward you. Greg rested his chin on her shoulder. I'll talk to her properly this year, so don't worry. Melanie remained silent. For the past 5 years, he had always said the same thing. But in the end, he always reverted to being a son in front of his mother. She couldn't blame him. Evelyn Williams was a well-known figure in Boston's social circles, and her influence was formidable. Melanie and Greg had met at a mutual friend's party 5 years ago. He was rapidly climbing the ladder of success as an analyst at a renowned investment firm, and she was pursuing her dream of owning her own interior design studio. They were drawn to each other, and a year later, they were married. It was evident that Evelyn had not been pleased with the marriage. She had wanted a girl from a better family for her son. Not someone like Melanie, a common woman from a middle-class background who had studied art, rather than someone from a so-called good Boston family. Mom called. Melanie changed the subject. Your grandmother will be coming again this year. Greg's face brightened. Grandma Martha? It's been so long. Melanie felt inwardly relieved at his reaction. Martha was Evelyn's mother and Melanie's only ally. The dignified and warm elderly lady had welcomed Melanie as family from the moment they first met. Mom said this Christmas is going to be special, Melanie continued. I wonder what that means. Greg shrugged. Who knows, Grandma has always been a bit mysterious. But if she's coming, that alone makes it special. That night, lying in bed, Melanie stared at the ceiling. The day after tomorrow, she would once again step into that luxurious penthouse. And once again, she would be seated at the others' table, rather than the family table. When Greg had protested this arrangement in the first year, Evelyn had insisted it was a tradition. And every year, Greg would insist on sitting at the same table as his wife, and every year, he would eventually yield to his mother's wishes. The phone rang. Checking the clock, Melanie saw it was past 11 p.m. The screen displayed an incoming call from Martha. Martha? Is everything all right? Melanie answered the phone with concern. Dill, my sweet child, Martha's gentle voice resonated. She was the only one who called Melanie Dill. I just wanted to hear your voice. I'm looking forward to the day after tomorrow. I'm looking forward to seeing you too, Melanie replied honestly. This Christmas is going to be special, Martha repeated those words again. For a long time, I've just been watching. But that's enough now. What do you mean? Melanie asked. You'll see soon enough, the elderly lady chuckled softly. Tell Evelyn. I'll be there on time. After the call ended, Martha's words lingered in Melanie's mind. For a long time, I've just been watching. But that's enough now. Greg turned over in bed and, half asleep, took her hand. Who were you talking to? Martha, Melanie replied. It seems this Christmas might be different. In a good way, I hope, Greg murmured before falling back asleep. Melanie looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall silently. For 5 years, she had endured Evelyn's cold treatment. For her husband's sake, and for the sake of superficial peace. Every Christmas dinner was a mental ordeal for her. In Evelyn's luxury apartment, she was always treated as the extra person. But this year, something seemed different. Martha's words had carried conviction. This Christmas is going to be special. Melanie took a deep breath. Amid mixed feelings of anxiety and anticipation, she finally fell asleep. At 5 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Melanie and Greg stood in front of the high-rise apartment in Back Bay. As a light snow fell, Greg readjusted the paper bag containing presents and turned to Melanie. "Are you okay?" He gently stroked her cheek. Melanie smiled and nodded slightly. She was dressed in a dark green dress, her hair elegantly put up. She knew the importance of first impressions, an instinct from her profession as an interior designer. Even if 5 years of effort had been in vain. Right on time. "I don't want to be late and get complained about." As they passed through the entrance and took the elevator to the penthouse on the top floor, Melanie took several deep breaths. When the doors opened, the sound of lively conversation could already be heard. Several guests had already gathered in the lavishly decorated penthouse. Greg's brother Jeremy and his wife Stephanie, his sister Caroline and her husband Michael. Additionally, some of Evelyn's friends had been invited. Greg. As soon as Evelyn spotted her son, she approached with a radiant smile. She embraced him with graceful movement and kissed both his cheeks. Her attire of a champagne gold silk blouse and white pantsuit made her look as though she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. "How have you been?" Evelyn held Greg's hands tightly, her eyes filled with affection. "Good, work is busy but going well," Greg replied. Evelyn's gaze finally turned to Melanie. At that moment, her expression subtly changed. The smile remained, but the warmth disappeared from her eyes. "Oh, Melanie too. Welcome," her words contained only the minimum of courtesy. "Good evening, Evelyn." "Lovely party," Melanie responded as she had learned to do. Smoothly getting through greetings and not worsening the relationship. That had been her strategy for 5 years. Evelyn merely nodded briefly, immediately taking Greg's arm and leading him to the living room. "Scott and Elizabeth want to see you. Their daughter is interested in the finance industry." Melanie followed behind them. As she entered the living room, Jeremy approached her with a smile. "Melanie. Finally here," he warmly embraced her. "Stephanie's been looking for you. She's in the kitchen." Melanie nodded with gratitude. Greg's siblings had been kind to her. Especially Jeremy's wife Stephanie, who had become a close friend. In the kitchen, Stephanie was opening a bottle of wine and was delighted at Melanie's arrival. "Finally here. You're a lifesaver. What do you think of this wine selection?" For the next 30 minutes, Melanie enjoyed chatting with Stephanie and Caroline. However, that peace didn't last long. "Melanie," Evelyn's voice resonated. "Please don't sit on that sofa. It's Mother's favorite spot." Melanie stood up and apologized, "I'm sorry." As she was about to move, Evelyn sighed. "That glass is from a special collection. The ones for regular guests are in the kitchen." Stephanie frowned. "But I'm using the same one." Evelyn's face hardened for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, was that so? Well, never mind then." Melanie nodded quietly, still holding the glass. She was used to these small harassments. Greg was watching the situation from a distance but didn't intervene. His expression showed anguish. The doorbell rang, and Evelyn quickly headed towards the door. "Mother," a voice of joy was heard. The atmosphere in the room changed. Everyone turned their gaze towards the entrance, watching as Martha Hamilton slowly entered, borrowing the support of an escort's arm. With a straight back that belied her 85 years, dressed in an elegant navy dress, Martha walked with dignity, using a cane. Her white hair was beautifully styled, and a pearl necklace gleamed at her neck. Good evening, everyone, Martha's clear voice resonated through the room. I'm pleased to be with family on Christmas Eve. Evelyn stood beside her mother, supporting her arm and playing the role of a devoted daughter. Mother, you must be tired from the long journey. Let's sit down and rest right away. But Martha shook her head. No, I want to greet all the family first. The moment her eyes found Melanie, a warm smile spread across her face. Dill, my sweet child. Melanie approached her and gently embraced her. Martha, I'm so glad you came. Martha took her hand and said in a low voice, I admire your patience. But today, something might change. Melanie was surprised at those words, but before she could ask anything, Evelyn intervened. Mother, this way please. I've prepared a special seat for you. Melanie was alone again, standing by the window, gazing at the snowy landscape outside. Martha's words echoed in her mind. Today, something might change. Greg appeared beside her and took her hand. Don't mind, Mother. Today is Christmas. I know, Melanie smiled. I'm fine. But in her heart, with Martha's arrival, the feeling that something significant was about to happen intensified. Melanie resolved to get through tonight. Everyone, please come to the dining room, Evelyn's voice resonated throughout the room. Dinner is ready. The clock pointed to 7 p.m. Outside the window, the streets of Boston were gradually enveloped in the darkness of night, with lights from high-rise buildings twinkling like stars. Inside the room, the warm light from the luxurious Christmas tree softly illuminated the space. The guests began moving to the dining room, following Evelyn's instructions. Melanie gently grasped Greg's arm and whispered, What about the seating arrangement? Greg smiled apologetically. I talked to Mother, but... Interrupting his words, Evelyn appeared before the two. Greg, you're at the main table. Next to Jeremy and Michael. Without even glancing at Melanie, she took her son's arm and led him to the main table. Melanie said nothing and headed towards a small side table. It happened every year. The family table and the others table. Evelyn's tradition. Stephanie sat down next to Melanie with an angry expression. Unbelievable. I'll sit with you. Don't, Melanie said gently. I don't want to create unnecessary rifts within the family. Stephanie reluctantly pursed her lips but eventually nodded. She returned to the main table and sat next to her husband. On the opposite side of the room, Martha was quietly observing everything. She was seated in the place Evelyn had designated, the head of the main table, but her eyes followed Melanie. Evelyn played the role of the perfect hostess, pouring wine into glasses and smoothly leading the conversation. This year's wine is sourced directly from the winery. It's a special vintage. Staff from the kitchen brought in one dish after another. First, a warm soup, then appetizers, followed by a luxurious salad. Melanie quietly enjoyed her meal at the side table. Though there was a sense of loneliness, she was accustomed to it. When preparations for the main course were complete, Evelyn stood up and lightly tapped her glass. Everyone, she said with a soft smile, looking around the room. I'm truly delighted to celebrate Christmas with family and friends again this year. The staff placed a perfectly roasted chicken on a silver platter in the center of the table. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled the room, and around the chicken, roasted potatoes and colorful vegetables were beautifully arranged. This year's main dish is, as always, my special recipe, Evelyn proudly declared. It's a recipe passed down through the family, and I only make it on special occasions. She signaled to the staff, and the main courses were brought to the table one after another. An exquisite roast chicken, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, gravy, and an assortment of roasted vegetables. Everything was perfectly prepared and presented like works of art. Now, let's all eat. Evelyn said with a beaming smile. Her eyes scanned the people around the family table. A perfectly plated dish was laid before each person. A moment of silence fell. And then Martha, in a small but clear voice, asked, "Where's Dill's portion?" The atmosphere in the room froze. All conversation stopped, and everyone's gaze shifted to Melanie, then to Evelyn. Evelyn's expression stiffened for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, I forgot," her voice contained an obvious lie. "I'll have it prepared right away." Melanie sat quietly at the side table with a gentle smile. In front of her was a small plate with just a portion of chicken and minimal side dishes. It was the meal Evelyn prepared every year for the others. "It's okay. I'm used to this kind of thing now." Melanie's voice was quiet but resonated throughout the room. She smiled graciously and picked up her fork. With those words, the room fell completely silent. Greg stared at his wife with a shocked expression. Jeremy uncomfortably shifted in his chair. Caroline bit her lip, and Stephanie glared at Evelyn with indignation. Evelyn's cheeks turned red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, no one could tell. She silently raised her wine glass and took a sip. Silence dominated the room, with only the small sounds of cutlery touching plates being heard. Suddenly, Martha slowly stood up. Her movements carried a dignity that belied her age. "It might be time to talk about the true meaning of family," she said quietly. Evelyn watched her mother with a wary expression. "Mother, it's dinner time now. Let's save special talks for later." But Martha firmly shook her head. "No, Evelyn. I've waited for 5 years. That's enough." She reached into her elegant handbag and pulled out a worn brown envelope. The envelope showed signs of age, with creases that suggested it had been opened and closed numerous times. "It's time to read this now," Martha said calmly. The color drained from Evelyn's face. "Mother, please." Her voice trembled. "Today is a special day. That's precisely why," Martha said in a resolute voice. "Because the entire family is gathered." She slowly opened the envelope and took out formal documents. As everyone in the room watched with bated breath, Martha put on her glasses and cleared her throat. Melanie looked at Greg with a confused expression. He looked equally bewildered and shrugged. "My dear family," Martha began reading. "For a long time, I've silently observed what's been happening in this family." She turned her gaze to Melanie and smiled gently. "Especially towards Dill, Melanie, who joined our family 5 years ago." Evelyn was now completely pale, sitting frozen. Her slender fingers gripped the tablecloth tightly. Martha continued, "Today, I want to share a decision with all of you. It's not merely an emotional decision, but the result of long, careful thought." Only stillness hung in the room. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, with only the small sound of it hitting the window panes being heard. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Martha, waiting for her next words. "This is my latest will," Martha declared quietly but firmly. "It has been officially notarized." Evelyn hurriedly stood up and tried to take her mother's arm. "Mother, please. We shouldn't be discussing this at the Christmas dinner table. Let's talk tomorrow, just the two of us." Her voice carried an urgency that had never been heard before. Her usually perfectly controlled demeanor was beginning to crumble. Martha gently but firmly brushed away her daughter's hand. "I've waited long enough, Evelyn. I'm 85 years old now. At my age, one never knows what might happen." Greg looked at his grandmother with a confused expression. "Grandma, what do you mean?" Martha looked around the room, confirming that all eyes were on her, and slowly opened the documents. "First, this is a will concerning my personal property. It's what I inherited from the Hamilton family." She took a deep breath and began reading. "I, Martha Elizabeth Hamilton Williams, being of sound mind, hereby declare my final wishes and testament as follows." The room was completely silent. Evelyn stood frozen at the edge of the table, staring at her mother. "I wish for the majority of my estate to be donated to the Boston Arts and Culture Foundation and the Harvard University Scholarship Fund," Martha continued. To my daughter, Evelyn Williams, only the legal portion of inheritance shall be granted. A small murmur ran through the room. Evelyn's face turned ashen, and she gripped the edge of the table tightly. Mother, what do you mean? Her voice trembled. Martha maintained her composure and continued, however, the historic villa I own in Beacon Point, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, known as Hamilton House, including the land, building, and all its contents, shall be transferred to Melanie Williams. This time, a loud murmur filled the room. Melanie was so astonished that she was at a loss for words. Hamilton House was a historic building located in one of the most beautiful spots in Cape Cod, a Victorian mansion built in the 1800s. Its estimated value was at least $15 million, and it was prime real estate that even Hollywood stars had expressed interest in purchasing. This must be a joke. Evelyn raised her voice. Mother, you're not in your right mind. That villa has belonged to the Hamilton family for generations. And now, I have chosen to give it to Melanie, Martha quietly replied. That is my choice and my right. Jeremy quietly spoke up. Grandma, why? Martha looked around the table, finally resting her eyes on Melanie's surprised face. I'll explain. She slowly sat back down and reached for her wine glass. One of the staff hurriedly came to pour water, but Martha shook her head and quietly said, Wine, please. Once her glass was filled, she took a sip and began to speak. 5 years ago, when Greg announced he was marrying Melanie, I was pleased. She was warm, sincere, and talented. However, my daughter had different ideas. Martha looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was now slumped in her chair, her face ashen. Evelyn always wanted Greg to marry someone from a better family. As she did herself. But I believe that a person's worth is not determined by their background or wealth, but by their heart and actions. Martha continued, over these 5 years, I've seen Melanie be patient, kind, and above all, strong. She has endured minor insults, smiled even when hurt, and put herself second for the sake of family peace. She put down her glass and addressed Melanie directly. Dill, when I was hospitalized last year, you came to my room every day. Evelyn said she was busy and only came once a week. Evelyn raised her face, trying to defend herself, but Martha raised her hand to stop her. You listened to my stories, shared old memories, and took care of me without complaint. You taught me the true meaning of family. Tears glistened in Martha's eyes. Hamilton House is not just a building. It's history, memories, and love. I want it to be inherited by someone who will cherish it with affection. Greg finally seemed to have found his voice. Grandma, this is surprising, isn't it? Martha smiled gently. But this is my wish. Evelyn stood up and said in a voice now filled with anger, this is unfair. That villa belongs to the family. She's an outsider. At those words, Greg's expression hardened. Mother. Melanie is my wife. She is family. Really? Evelyn retorted sharply. Then why do you seat her at the side table? Why treat her as the other? Martha quietly said, that's the problem, Evelyn. You've always categorized people. Family and outsiders. Upper class and lower class. And you've neglected me too. Evelyn stood speechless. For the past 5 years, I've watched how you've treated Melanie, Martha continued. And it reflects how you've treated me. Formal respect. Consideration out of duty, not genuine affection. The room fell silent again. Across the table, Melanie met Greg's eyes. His eyes held confusion and, simultaneously, a light of new understanding. Melanie, Martha called gently. This is not just real estate. Hamilton House comes with conditions. Melanie looked up in surprise. Conditions? Martha nodded. The house is registered as a historic building. You'll need to preserve it and occasionally open it to the public. That's my wish to share my family's legacy. Melanie nodded quietly. I understand, Martha. I'll fulfill that responsibility. Martha smiled with satisfaction and added in a solemn voice, and finally, this is not merely a material inheritance. It's a lesson. True family is not bound by blood or name, but by love and respect. She gazed at Evelyn. It's not too late, daughter. You can change. Evelyn said nothing and left the room. The sound of the door closing broke the heavy silence. Greg went to his wife's side and took her hand. Mel, Grandma is right. I'm truly sorry I couldn't confront Mother all this time. Melanie gently squeezed his hand back. It's all right, Greg. We'll get through this together. Martha looked around at the family with satisfaction. Now, let's eat this roast chicken before it gets cold. Christmas is, after all, about enjoying a meal together, isn't it? She reached out towards Melanie. Dill, come here and sit next to me. At the real family table. 1 year later at Christmas, Hamilton House in Cape Cod was illuminated with a gentle light. The warm glow leaking from the windows softly lit up the snow-covered garden. Melanie stood by the large window, gazing at the view stretching towards the sea. Winter in Cape Cod was enveloped in an unpopular quietness, but there was a unique beauty in that solitude. The sound of waves breaking on the shore could be heard from a distance. Thinking? Greg placed his hand on her shoulder. Melanie turned around with a smile. A little. About this past year. A year since that shocking Christmas dinner, their lives had changed significantly. Greg had left his investment firm in Boston and established a local financial consulting company. Melanie had moved her interior design studio to Cape Cod and had opened part of Hamilton House as a residency program for young artists. It was both continuing Martha's legacy and fulfilling Melanie's own dream. The doorbell rang. Melanie moved away from the window. Are you ready? Greg took a deep breath. Yes, I'm fine. When they opened the front door, Martha was standing there with her cane. Even at 86, her eyes still had a lively light. Merry Christmas, Dill, she hugged Melanie. Martha, I'm so glad you came. Melanie guided the elderly lady into the house. Behind them, they could see Evelyn getting out of a taxi. She was wearing a simple coat and scarf, not the high-end branded clothing from before. Her expression mixed anxiety with determination. Since that night, Evelyn had changed dramatically. She had sold her luxury apartment and started living more modestly. Her apology to Melanie and Greg hadn't been easy, and they were still in the process of rebuilding their relationship, but at least she was making an effort. Hello, Evelyn greeted awkwardly. Welcome, Evelyn, Melanie replied calmly. She had complex feelings in her heart, but she had decided today would be a new beginning. In the dining room, a splendid dinner table was prepared. It didn't have the showy luxury of Evelyn's former home, but it had a warmth and sincerity that could be felt. In the center of the table was a fragrant roast chicken, surrounded by colorful vegetable dishes. When it was time to sit down, Evelyn hesitated for a moment. Where should I? Sit wherever you like, Melanie answered. There's no other's table here. Evelyn understood the meaning of those words and nodded slightly. She chose a seat at the edge of the table. Melanie brought the last dish of the main course from the kitchen. She slowly placed the plate in front of Evelyn and gently said, "Here's your portion of the roast chicken." Evelyn looked up in surprise and met Melanie's eyes. There was no resentment there, only hope for a new beginning. Thank you, Evelyn replied softly but sincerely. Martha smiled with satisfaction and raised her glass. To family bonds and new traditions. Outside, snow had begun to fall quietly, dyeing the winter night in Cape Cod white. The warm light of Hamilton House illuminated the shape of a new family.